We want to start first with the Burke Volunteer Fire Department as to when did it start and how did it get started?
Members of the community had a little community organization. Older members, I was only 17 at the time, when they decided they wanted to have a volunteer fire department. All the departments in Fairfax County at that time were volunteer fire departments. And so they got together and decided, well, yeah. So I think they started maybe in 47, but it was actually 48 by the time they, on paper, that they got started. We didn't know how to spell fire, much less be firefighters and all that. And that's where we started.
So you were one of its first members?
Well, yeah, my brother and I were both, well, we lived right there where the fire, well, we didn't have a firehouse, but right behind that store, Staub's store, there on the corner, there was a big, almost a small barn, and it would house vehicles. It had a bay there that you could put one in, but just a wooden building, and we put Old Red we got from Annandale. It was a homemade fire truck, just had a little gear pump on it, like a fuel oil truck would have, a little pump that runs off the transmission, and nothing for fighting house fires, big fires, but it was good for brush fires and vehicles, small fires. And we started with that, and we put that thing in the winter. Well, the only place we had to put it was in that building behind the store. Okay. And you couldn't close the doors because it was longer than the building was. But, and then in the winter, it's going to freeze water, you know. It carried 400 gallons of water. That one did, homemade tank. And we put a fire coat over the front end of it when you're running down the road a lot of times.
Did it have a horn, or, you know, we're so used to hearing fire trucks with...
It had a siren.
Had a siren.
But it also had, in those days, it was used exhaust whistle. That there was a whistle that ran off of the exhaust pipe that you could blow it. It would scream a little bit, but no air horns. Of course, there were no air brakes, or anything. And that was the big thing. This was a 30-some-odd Ford truck, no cab on it. It had a windshield, but the rest of the cab was gone. And
so how many members did you have, approximately?
I don't know. Initially, we may have had 12, 15 or so to begin with as we started out. But
and did you have training? Or did you just say, hey, there's a fire, come help us?
You might say on-the-job training.
On-the-job training, okay.
That was the majority. We had members that may have been members somewhere else too, or had some fire training.
And did you have a captain, or, you know?
No, and there were no paid people in Fairfax County, no paid firefighters in Fairfax County until 49.
So did you have to get recognition from Fairfax County as a fire department? Okay.
Yeah, they had a fire commission, volunteers.
Okay.
But they were, the commission was made up of mainly the chiefs of the volunteer fire departments, as well as I recall. They were usually the chief.
So when there was well, first of all, how important was the fire department to the community?
Well, it drew people in. I mean, you know, we got members, and you got some protection if you had a fire anywhere in our local area. At least we could run out there and put some water on it. But we didn't have but one ladder, for instance, and that was a big old 3-section heavy old ladder, but didn't have a whole lot of equipment. And at first we didn't even have decent breathing apparatus either, until the county came along a few years later and started issuing the self-contained air tanks that go on the back. And they are not oxygen tanks, as some people will incorrectly call them. They are air.
Fresh air.
Breathing air. And
Okay.
it's not the same air you get from the dealers to weld with and all that, you know, anything. This is pure air, supposedly.
So there weren't any fire hydrants.
Oh, no.
Right. So when you had, you filled your 400 gallon, is it from the creek?
Usually,
Yeah.
right from Powhatan
Powhatan
Creek,
Creek,
we
yeah.
were right there. And, I mean, we could fill from a hydrant. I mean, but
there
you
was
had to go to Fairfax or Annandale, someplace where there were some hydrants, because we didn't have any anywhere
Right.
near us in
Okay.
those days. No.
Now, I assume that you needed funding to, you know, buy equipment and stuff like that. So did you have any fundraisers?
The usually a bake sale, and then eventually we got around to the auctions. We had the firehouse auctions in the fall, where we would gather junk from anybody
Used.
that had stuff to donate, you
Right.
know. And once in a while, we even had some new stuff. And, well, for instance, in 1953, I had a dump truck that I had bought that year, and I had a load of bank gravel. That's right, straight from a gravel pit over at Bayless Crossroads. And I had that load of gravel on there that I donated the gravel, not the truck, but anybody wanted to bid on that. Well, the auctioneer was the one that bought that, bought the gravel, and then he didn't want it at that. He wasn't ready for it at that time, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll get it later.
I've
We
heard
did.
of, when I was doing other interviews and stuff, I'd heard about turkey shoots.
Yes.
And in my naivete, I thought you were shooting at turkeys.
Yeah, right.
So can you explain what a turkey shoot was?
Targets.
Okay.
And you used the shotguns. You could use a 12 gauge shotgun, and we furnished the shells, because some people, you know, you could use different loads in a shotgun shell. They're a bunch of little BBs, you know, little things in a shotgun. And you fired at a target. I've forgotten how far away, but it was maybe 30 yards or something like that, 20 yards possibly, 20 yards maybe away. And the little paper targets, and they had, of course, had a bullseye and all that, but when you fired the shotgun, well, that scatters, you know, the shot scatters, and you'd get 8 or 10 little pellets maybe that hit the target. Well, anybody that would, I don't know if you had maybe 10 people would shoot not at one time, but I mean, you sold a ticket to the shooters, and whoever got the closest to the or got the most shells and most pellets in the target, or anybody hit the bullseye, for instance, then they would get the prize, and which would be either a turkey or a ham. And usually is what we had.
So how often did you do these?
Prizes. That was just once a year.
Once a year, like a
I
big
think,
fundraiser?
for those,
Yeah.
yes. But then we had our dinner. We started later on. Started having the fire department dinner, and we used to have one in in the spring, chicken and ham dinner, and then in the fall, we'd have a turkey and ham dinner. And at first, we'd have those at the church, which there wasn't even, it was just a big enough place to sit down, that was about all. Didn't have a real fancy kitchen or anything, but eventually we got to use the Burke Elementary School, had a cafeteria in it. And that worked out very nicely, where we could use that cafeteria. We had to go in on a Saturday morning after 8 o'clock and start setting up things and all that. And Elsie Sheeds was the manager of the cafeteria at that time. She was a local resident, Bill Sheeds' sister. And it worked out nice. We had to get everything out though on Saturday night. I mean, after cleanup, the dinners would be in the evening. We had a big drawing for those things. People really loved to come out to the fire department dinners. Most all the fire departments had.
When was the first building, firehouse built?
The old building, the initial building, it was probably started in 48.
Okay.
It may have been 49 or so before they actually got started on it. And then I was mostly all volunteer labor. Because of our volunteers by that time had grown, a number of them, and had them from all walks of life, from the white collar people right down to the working man, and all that. And we were fortunate. We had a bunch of carpenters and electricians, and for instance, plumbers and all this and that,
And were you on call 24 hours a day?
Well, for
volunteers?
Volunteers.
Yeah.
Of course, the majority of the volunteers that are working, they're old enough, are working. And not too much work going on out in Burke. And then, back then, unless you were a farmer.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and then all hours of the night, I mean, of course, weekends and day, whatever. So whenever the fire whistle blew, and even then, we didn't have our own personal radios either, monitors, so to speak.
So how were you alerted?
Hearing the house siren blowing.
So you had to have been like within hearing distance.
Oh, yes.
I don't think somebody lives down on 123 or whatever.
And, some of those fire whistles were quite loud. Some were on towers where it blew out more and would have more than one speaker coming from it. Okay. The one we started with was just had more or less 2 speakers on it. It was okay for right around.
Near your barn? Was it near the
fire?
Oh,
it sat right,
right
on top of the firehouse.
Okay, all right.
And then when Roy Carson started his store, he put up a little siren down there also, so that when we got a call, his didn't go off automatically. Ours was automatic. I mean, when the fire dispatcher had a call for you, they rang. It was a private phone, direct line, into your station, and that mechanism would set the siren off. He couldn't call on that phone just to chat with you without setting the siren off. I mean, but
now his store is where the gas station is today. Is that where Carson's store was? Roy Carson's.
Yeah, well, he took over the Staub store.
So it's where
M.D. Hall's property. Yeah.
Oh, so it's
that was the same store.
Where
not my grandfather's store.
No, but where the gas station is today? Is that the location where Carson's was?
No.
No.
Not where the gas station. It's where the post office is now.
Okay, all right. I got
the
it
post
straight.
office eventually bought that property.
Now, what were your boundaries? In other words, the fire dispatcher called. I mean, could you go all the way to Little River Turnpike? Did you go down to 123? Generally, what were the boundaries? Yes, to all of it.
Yes, 123 was more or less our southern boundary, and then we ran Clifton was Station 16, but they did have a fire department prior to becoming Fairfax County. They had a civil defense building up there, and they did have a piece of equipment. But going south from Burke, there was nothing, no Lorton Fire Department in those days, and we went all the way, we can say all the way to Occoquan, but Occoquan Village in the old days had a small fire station, and Fairfax County supposedly gave them a certain amount of money every year to help protect that lower end of Fairfax County. And Occoquan was in Prince William County. And they'd just come across the creek, Occoquan River, that became, they'd come up into Fairfax County as part of their first due, but we would be assisting. We were the second due people in there. And then on around Rolling Road, coming up, or Accotink Creek actually, coming up to Braddock Road, all up through there, Kings Park, all that area.
What about Fairfax Station?
Well, now, Fairfax Station, we went out as far as, well, Sideburn.
Okay.
Well, most people won't know Sideburn anymore, but that was a railroad stop also between Burke and then Fairfax Station and Fairfax. But Fairfax Fire Department ran all of Fairfax Station back in those days. And,
Did you respond to medical emergencies also?
not at first, because
Okay.
we didn't have an ambulance, but eventually, after we got our first aid training, advanced first aid training, they called it, we did get an ambulance, bought one from Herndon Fire Department that was, had bought a new one, and we picked up their old 52 Pontiac, which was actually like a hearse. It was built a long wheelbase. It wasn't just a station wagon by any means. I mean, it was built as like a hearse, or a flower wagon that nowadays that they use. Long wheelbase, 52